Hey everyone, it's Andy with Reverb, and today I'm kind of revisiting some of my old friends, some early boutique pedals that I first demoed, over 10, 15 years ago. And the reason is some of these left a huge impression on me, and many of them had features that I hadn't even seen before. As a guitar player growing up in the 80s and 90s, I had Boss and DOD, and we didn't have oscillating fuzzes and things with clean blend. And the surprising thing is that a lot of these trailblazing effects are still a bargain when you're looking for them used on Reverb. I found a half a dozen of them, all for under $200, with the first one, the Voodoo Lab Sparkle Drive, under $100. Of course, clean blend has been in use decades before with studios, especially with bass guitar, or if you kind of want to have multiple amps going at the same time. But this is one that really gave you the full power of dialing in that clean signal in parallel with an overdrive. So that right there is just pure clean boost, and judging by the way the volume is set, it tells us we have a lot more boost available. We're kind of just above unity gain here, but it does help having that extra volume when we start to roll back the blend and we hear the overdrive circuit. You're going to kind of want to compensate by going more with the volume control because it is less loud. And also, there's a lot more of that kind of mid-range honk in there with the overdrive circuit. So having the blend back a little bit, or actually forwards in this case, we're putting back the dry signal, and that low end is kind of retained. And that was one of the things that really kind of blew my mind way back when I first demoed the Sparkle Drive. You could back off on the tone, have the gain high, but then, all the high frequencies and the natural dynamics are coming through, and you don't hear that usual grittiness of a screamer style overdrive on the top end because we've shaved it off with the tone knob. By the time I demoed the Witch Fuzz God II, I had already been exposed to the wonders of the fuzz factory and how self-oscillation can be a useful thing. But very few pedals since have given you the option to put this parasitic oscillation circuit on a foot switch, making it a versatile tool on stage because you could use a vintage tone as your core sound and then mangle it on the fly at any point. So we can change the gain amount and the tone as well, and we can also adjust the sputter and get more of a Velcro texture when you back it off. It kind of also gates the fuzz, so if you really want to have a tighter riff, kind of backing things off and getting it more of a starved sound is really helpful. And now on to the foot switchable self-oscillation. Again, something I think that really makes this Fuzz God II very unique, even by today's standards. And we could change the pitch of the self-oscillation with the wrath knob, but also a slew of other controls because it's all very interactive. Even the guitar's volume knob will change the pitch. And the sputter comes in really handy when you have the wrath or the self-oscillation engaged. You could use it as a noise gate on those lower sputter settings. And it doesn't have all the blaring self-oscillation in the background, but you could still hear how it's influencing the decay of the fuzz, especially if you have a lower frequency dialed in. You get these weird glitchy sub-octave effects or almost arpeggios kind of crumbling underneath your notes. The Malekko Ekko 616 Mark II. My friends in Portland, who are sadly no longer making pedals, came up with this compact yet high quality take on a Bucket Brigade delay with a stellar modulation circuit. This one has been a favorite of mine despite the newer wave of analog delays with tap tempo or even expression control. The repeats are filtered just right, and even longer delay times avoid the famous chirp in the repeats. They saved that for the later lo-fi version of this delay. So just starting off without any modulation and just dialing in that classic dotted eighth note rhythm that you hear from the Edge in the early U2 days, it's just kind of like that classic sound without needing any extra rack gear or anything. It just does the thing, and it does it really well. And of course, the great thing about analog delays is that if you just kind of want a little bit of space in the background, those darker repeats are really great at just kind of standing back and letting your guitar's dry signal take the forefront. So if you just kind of want to add some space during a solo, or just have something that's just kind of floating and modulating, analog delay is a great place to look. And whenever I see a new analog delay with modulation, I always have to compare it to the 616, because this one just has a great range in terms of the speed and the depth. So if you want it nice and slow and subtle, you could get those chorus sounds, but it also has enough speed where you could kind of make it like there's a Leslie in the repeats, especially if you have it on a slower repeat. You could really hear those faster, rotary speaker sounds in the background. The Zvex Box of Rock was the first time I encountered a Marshall in a box that actually sounded like the Marshalls I grew up playing. Although it's not one of those pedals that follows an amp circuit to a T, it definitely captures the essence and spirit by giving you a huge dynamic range, but also sags and compresses when you crank up the gain, just like the real deal. Best of all, Zvex still make this pedal, and a Vexor version will save you a lot of money if you don't mind silkscreening. So for me, it really starts to nail that Marshall JTM squishiness when you have the gain cranked up. And that's something I really didn't hear in any other overdrive prior to demoing this one way back when. You know, they had the Marshall Bluesbreaker pedal, but you know, really that's just a soft clipping overdrive, and the name is kind of just a subtle mention to that style of overdrive. It's not really going after that circuit. So let's back off on the gain and see what the boost can do when you have both of them stacked. So I can't help but smile when I put on the boost there. It's really just kind of like a unabashed boost that just, you know, pushes anything. It doesn't have to be a tube amp. You could be plugging into a solid state amplifier, and with that boost engaged, it's really going to just push things and make it clip and squish in really interesting ways. So Box of Rock, it really doesn't lie, and you know, I think that sums it up. So let's move on to the next one. Retrosonic came out of the gate with an all-star lineup of effects covering every category, including the FA1 boost made famous by the Edge, a stunning Phase 90 with added depth and output volume, and this analog chorus, a sonic recreation of the Boss CE1. This early mono version uses a 12-volt AC adapter, so buyer beware, but by the time I demoed it in 08, they'd already revised it to run on 9 volts DC, and they give it wet and dry outputs. So a wide range of classic chorus sounds, and when you hit it with some overdrive, it really kind of gets almost like a flanger effect, especially on those slower settings where the width is actually shallower because we're affecting speed and depth or width. Let's go over to the vibrato mode, and this one actually still has a little bit of dry signal in the mix. It's not 100% wet signal like a Boss vibrato, but I find that extra bit of dry signal really keeps everything balanced and doesn't get too wiggly or out of tune. The visual sound Jekyll and Hyde was everywhere in the late 90s and 2000s. This ultimate overdrive gives you two circuits in series, each with their own unique gain structure and tone shaping options. Although the latest, more compact version can be found under their latest name True Tone, I never got to hear this early red version in person, and I snagged one up for under $200 on Reverb. So let's start off with the lower gain overdrive channel and see what kind of range we get, especially with that bass boost switch. Now the bass boost. that bass boost really helps fatten things up and gets a little bit more weight behind the notes, or it could kind of thin things out if you're wanting to use more of a neck pickup situation. It really helps to back off on the bass. So let's check out the distortion, and then of course we could stack the overdrive on top of that. Now check out the huge EQ sweep. We're kind of more of a mid-boosted area here. Let's increase the EQ, which is actually going to scoop things out. Now with kind of a sweet spot here, not really maxing out the gain 100%, let's engage the overdrive and the distortion. And what we're going to do here is actually use a little bit of output volume from the overdrive to really give this crunchy distortion an extra lead boost. Well, there you go, some early boutique effects that had a huge effect on me and the pedal industry, but you could also find for a really great deal right here on Reverb. Do let us know if you have your own favorites in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.